Have you ever noticed the quiet that follows a goodbye? It's not the kind of silence that comes with anger or resentment. It's not cold. It's not cruel. It's that kind of silence that breathes. That kind of silence that speaks louder than anything you could ever say. When a woman walks away without shouting, without pleading, without asking to be understood, she steps into a kind of peace that has its own frequency, and whether he realizes it or not, he feels it. He may not know why he checks his phone more often, or why a certain song suddenly brings a weight to his chest, but something shifted, and that something is you. There's a sacred energy that emerges when a woman stops needing to be heard by the one who refused to listen. It's not indifference. It's not pretending. It's the deep, internal knowing that her value no longer depends on his recognition. As Louise Hay so gently reminded us, I am not a victim. I choose to live in peace and joy. And when you choose peace, you're not giving up on love. You're giving up on begging for crumbs. Peace changes the air. It unsettles what once was predictable. The woman who once waited by the phone, who once silenced her truth just to maintain connection, is now still, but not stagnant. She is present, and that presence, grounded and whole, becomes unmistakable even in absence. For a man who was used to emotional dependence, this peace is confronting, because it reveals what was never mutual. It reflects what was never whole. And maybe that's where it stings. Not because you're gone, but because you're no longer trying to stay. There's no drama, no confrontation, just you, choosing yourself. And this, more than any angry message, more than any desperate call, becomes the moment where something clicks. The mirror has turned, and now, he is the one facing the void. Lisa Bourbeau teaches us that when we heal the wound of rejection, we stop needing to prove our worth. And when a woman no longer fights to be chosen, she dismantles the very structure that his ego was resting on. You were not just the woman he dated. You were the mirror that reflected what he was unwilling to face in himself. And when that mirror walks away in peace, the reflection disappears. That's what he feels. That's what haunts him. But the question that truly matters isn't whether he misses you. It's deeper than that. It's more honest. Does he miss you, or does he miss the control he had when you didn't know your worth? Because peace isn't just an exit. Peace is a declaration. A woman at peace is a woman no longer living in reaction to someone else's confusion. And that is the most magnetic goodbye of all. Let's continue this journey. Now that you've stepped into peace, let's explore what happens when he realizes you're not waiting anymore. There comes a moment, often unnoticed by the world, but deeply felt within, when a woman quietly decides she won't wait anymore. It's not a loud decision. It's not made in rage or desperation. It's made in that silent, aching space between one ignored message and another unanswered need. It's made in the stillness of realizing that her presence was never truly met with presence. And so, she lets go, not because she stopped loving, but because she started listening to herself. This is the moment he begins to feel something different. The energy shifts. The emotional weight that once made him feel important disappears. Because the truth is, there's a strange kind of power in being needed, even if he never fully reciprocated. And when she stops needing, when she stops waiting for him to become what he never committed to be, the dynamic that once defined the connection begins to dissolve. Suddenly, her silence feels unfamiliar, her absence, heavier than her presence ever was. He may not articulate it, he may not admit it, but somewhere deep in his nervous system, in his unconscious mind, he feels the loss of that emotional anchor he took for granted. The woman who once held space for his confusion, who once softened her truth to keep the connection, is no longer there holding that weight. And now, there is a gap, a void, a space where her devotion used to live, a space he used to lean on without noticing. And in that space, he begins to question, not her, but himself. Why isn't she waiting? Why did she stop trying? These questions don't always come with insight. Sometimes, they come with restlessness, with guilt, with confusion. But what matters is not what he thinks. It's what she finally sees. That her value never depended on being chosen. That her worth was never in the waiting. That her time, her love, her soul were never meant to be placed on hold. And now that she's no longer standing at the door of a closed heart, she begins to walk, not away from him, but toward herself. And as she walks, something within him stirs. Not because he lost her, but because he lost access to a version of himself that only existed when she waited. Let's go deeper. There's a more subtle shift that happens next, one that touches not just his mind, but the very structure of emotional power between them. Let's talk about the silent impact of emotional wholeness. There's a kind of transformation that happens when a woman begins to remember who she is, not through the eyes of someone else, but through her own reflection. It doesn't happen all at once. It begins slowly, in moments of stillness, in mornings where the ache softens, and nights where the silence no longer feels like punishment. It begins when she no longer asks, "Why doesn't he love me?" but instead wonders, "Why have I forgotten to love myself this deeply?" And in that remembering, she becomes whole, not perfect, not immune to longing, but whole, in a way that is no longer dependent on being needed. Emotional wholeness is not a mask. It's not the denial of pain. It's the integration of it. It's the knowing that even with the scars, she is enough. Especially with the scars, she is worthy. He feels this shift, not because she says it, not because she announces it, but because the energy she once directed toward him is now rooted in herself. He feels that she is no longer orbiting his inconsistency. She is centered, grounded. Her joy is no longer conditional. Her peace is no longer negotiated. And that changes the game. Because for a man who drew significance from being her emotional center, the realization that she no longer looks to him for validation is destabilizing. It's confusing. It's confronting. Louise Hay once said, "I now discover how wonderful I am." And when a woman discovers this, she doesn't become arrogant. She becomes radiant. Her radiance isn't loud. It's not designed to prove anything. It simply exists, and it is felt. She no longer tries to be the exception to his emotional unavailability. She no longer interprets his silence as a mystery to solve, because now she listens to her own silence. And in that silence, she finds clarity. She finds strength. She finds herself. But there's something else that happens when a woman becomes whole, something that dismantles more than confusion. It dismantles power, because now he can no longer use her pain to feel powerful. There's a difficult truth that many women discover only after the pain has done its work. Sometimes, what we called love was actually a dynamic of imbalance. Sometimes, what we thought was intimacy was just the comfort of being needed in our weakness. And when a woman lived for too long offering love in exchange for moments of recognition, something subtle began to happen. Her pain became useful to him, not consciously, not maliciously, but emotionally. It fed a system. Each time she broke down, he was reminded of the power he held. Each time she pleaded, he was centered in her world. And in that strange choreography, her vulnerability became his mirror of importance. But when she begins to heal, truly heal, that system collapses. When a woman reclaims her soul from the hands of someone who never knew how to hold it, she no longer reacts in ways that reassure his dominance. She no longer cries in front of closed doors. She no longer explains her wounds to someone who never learned to listen. And with that shift, the emotional terrain changes completely. Suddenly, he no longer knows where he stands. He no longer gets to feel needed at her lowest. He no longer finds comfort in her despair. Because now, her center is no longer outside of her. Her peace no longer depends on his validation. And for a man who once felt significant in her suffering, this new reality is disarming. The absence of pain doesn't just change the story, it ends the game. The old rules no longer apply. The strategies that once worked, ignoring, withdrawing, giving crumbs, no longer hold weight, because she's not playing, she's living. And this is the quiet revolution of a woman who chooses healing. Her stillness is not passive, it is sacred. Her peace is not empty, it is full of everything she once gave away too easily. Let's go even deeper. After the games are over, something even more confusing begins to rise. The moment when he realizes, you're genuinely happy without him. He never expected your happiness to arrive in his absence. In truth, he thought he knew how the story would go, that you would grieve for a while, maybe reach out, maybe hold on to some part of the past. Maybe you'd wait, maybe you'd miss him in the quiet hours, because that's how it always was. You, holding space. You, carrying hope. You, adjusting your brightness to fit inside his shadows. But something shifted, and that something was not born of resentment. It was born of release. When a woman begins to smile without pretending, when her eyes regain their light without needing to prove it, when her laughter no longer carries the ache of wanting to be chosen, that's when confusion begins to settle in his chest. Because now, he sees that her happiness doesn't need him. Her joy is no longer shaped by his presence. It stands on its own, like a tree that grew even after the storm took everything. And that's hard to witness for someone who once believed he was the center of her world. He wonders, how can she be fine? How can she move on so gently, so peacefully, without bitterness? He thought the absence would break her. Instead, it built her. He thought the silence would punish her. Instead, it protected her. What he doesn't always see is the journey she walked to arrive here. The nights she cried without answers. The mornings she chose to breathe instead of beg. The silent choices she made to stop romanticizing potential and start honoring her present. What he sees now is only the blossom, but she remembers the burial it took to get there. This is what disarms him. Not your anger, not your silence, but your joy. Real joy. Not the joy posted for attention, but the joy that radiates from a woman who is no longer waiting to be loved in fragments. And when he sees that, it reveals something uncomfortable, that the bond he imagined was mutual might have always been lopsided, that your depth was real, while his was circumstantial. But there's more, because your healing doesn't just confuse him. It reflects something back that he's long avoided. Let's talk now about what your peace mirrors back to him. Peace is not neutral. It carries a message. When a woman heals and no longer reacts, no longer chases, no longer explains, her silence becomes a mirror, not the kind that flatters, the kind that reveals, the kind that shows a man not just her evolution, but everything he didn't want to see in himself. He might look at your peace, and for the first time, feel what it meant to you when he left your messages unanswered, when he left your heart waiting at the edge of hope, when he confused your vulnerability with weakness and your devotion with naivety. And now, standing on the other side of your healing, he faces something much harder than guilt. He faces recognition, because now he feels the rejection he once inflicted. Not by your hands, but through the reflection of his own absence. It's not you rejecting him. It's his own actions echoing back in a space that is no longer soft enough to absorb them. Louise teaches that the wound of rejection creates a loop. We unconsciously seek validation from those who trigger it. And in that loop, we often become who we needed to escape. But when a woman breaks this cycle, when she no longer reacts from her wound, but responds from her healing, she breaks more than a pattern. She breaks a spell, and he feels it. He might not know the language for it. He might not even speak of it, but he feels the shift, that you're no longer open in the same way, that the version of you who once needed reassurance no longer exists, that you've become a different mirror, one that reflects clarity instead of need, one that doesn't beg to be seen, but simply shines. This kind of mirror doesn't flatter the ego, it confronts the soul, and some men are not ready for that. Some look away, others feel the sting and begin to wake up. But either way, the reflection has done its work. Your peace has spoken, not to hurt, not to punish, but to reveal. And now, a new tension rises within him. He may begin to admire you, to respect you, but with that respect comes a quiet realization. He lost access to a version of you that no longer exists. Something changes when respect replaces familiarity. There was a time when he felt entitled to your softness, when your patience was expected, not cherished, when your presence was assumed, not honored. And now, in your absence, or perhaps in your new presence, the one that doesn't bend so easily, he begins to see you differently, not as someone who can be called upon at will, but as someone who has become distant in a sacred way. This distance isn't cold, it's not punishment, it's the natural boundary that healing creates. And for a man who once moved freely through your emotional world, it feels like a door that no longer opens the same way. He may admire your strength now. He may even say he respects your growth. But beneath that respect lives something else. The awareness that he no longer holds the key to your attention, the key to your emotional availability, the key to the version of you that waited, hoped, adjusted, and forgave without being asked. There is a kind of loss that happens not through rejection, but through evolution. And that's what he feels now. The woman who once ached for closure has made peace with the lack of it. The woman who once feared being alone now rests comfortably in her own company. She has become someone who no longer needs his approval, and that is the version of her he can't reach, not because she's gone, but because she's risen. He may circle back, he may express admiration, but admiration is not intimacy, and what he lost was not just your affection. It was the access to your heart, when it still needed his presence to feel complete. And this is the paradox. Sometimes it's only when a woman detaches that a man finally sees her value, but by then she has seen it too. And now, it's not something she needs proven by anyone else. But let's pause here, because there's something Louise would say to a woman who chose peace over closure, and that wisdom deserves space of its own. Closure is often romanticized, as if healing depends on one final conversation, one last explanation, one moment where everything finally makes sense. But Louise Hay taught something more tender, more radical. I release all criticism. I forgive myself and others. I am free. Freedom doesn't always come from words exchanged. It comes from energy released. The woman who chose peace over closure is not naive. She is wise. She understands that waiting for someone else to make sense of what never made sense to her only prolongs the pain. She realizes that the answers she craved were never going to undo the hurt. And so, instead of searching for resolution outside, she turned inward. That turning inward is sacred. It's the moment a woman stops looking for her healing in someone else's remorse. It's the day she no longer needs an apology to validate the impact. It's the choice to honor what she felt, without needing permission to let it go. Louise would remind her that criticism, whether turned toward the self or the other, only anchors pain deeper. That forgiveness is not about approval, but about liberation. That the real closure comes when she stops asking why it happened, and starts asking what she can become because of it. And what she becomes is not defined by who left, or how they left, or what they never said. What she becomes is shaped by every morning she rose without answers, and still chose to live with an open heart. This kind of peace is powerful, not because it silences the past, but because it refuses to let the past speak louder than the present. She is not ignoring what happened. She is integrating it. She is allowing it to move through her, not own her. And in that, she becomes her own closure. She becomes the full stop at the end of a sentence that no longer needs rewriting. But something strange often happens next. When a woman fully lets go, fully stands in her peace, fully reclaims herself, sometimes the past comes knocking, not for love, but for familiarity. Let's explore what happens when he feels a sudden urge to return, but not for the right reasons. There's a particular silence that makes a man restless. Not the silence of absence, but the silence of indifference. The silence of a woman who no longer waits. And in that silence, something stirs. A memory, a curiosity, a pull. He may feel it late at night, scrolling through old messages. He may feel it when he hears her name, or sees her in a dream, or stumbles upon her laughter in a place he thought he'd forgotten. Suddenly, the urge arises, to call, to text, to reach out. But often it is not love that moves him. It is loss, not of the relationship, but of the emotional access he once had, the warmth he could return to when the world felt cold, the softness he relied on when he needed to feel seen, the devotion that made him feel worthy, even when he hadn't earned it. And now that it's gone, now that she no longer responds the same, now that her joy exists without him, he begins to feel the void. But the danger is mistaking longing for readiness. Because wanting her back is not the same as being ready to meet her where she is now. She is not the same woman who waited in doorways and decoded mixed signals. She is not the same soul who confused emotional crumbs for connection. She has become someone new, someone who no longer confuses return with redemption. And this is where her peace becomes her protection. Because when he reaches out, it might not be out of love. It might be out of habit, out of ego, out of a need to re-anchor himself in a place that once felt safe. But she knows now, safe isn't about the familiar. Safe is about truth. Safe is about reciprocity. And the woman who has found peace will not trade it for a second round of confusion. She doesn't need to block him. She doesn't need to argue. Her silence, her clarity, her calm, they speak for her. And they guard her. Because she understands now, when a man returns for the woman she was, he will not recognize the woman she's become. But even so, there's one final shift, one last distance that he feels. And this, perhaps, is the most painful one of all. Let's talk about the emotional distance he can't cross anymore. There's a kind of distance that no apology can reach. It doesn't come from bitterness or walls built out of pain. It comes from growth, from clarity, from the kind of healing that realigns a woman with her truth so deeply that she no longer vibrates in the same emotional field. He might still try to access her, not just through messages, but through memories, through shared songs, through old habits. But every time he tries, he finds that she is no longer there in the same way. Not emotionally, not spiritually, not energetically. What once was a wide-open heart is now a sacred space, guarded not by fear, but by wisdom. And this is what confuses him most, because she was always reachable, always willing to give one more chance, one more explanation, one more fragment of hope. But now, her kindness has boundaries, her love has discernment, Her energy no longer leaks toward those who cannot hold it. He may feel regret. He may even recognize the beauty of what he lost. But some distances are not meant to be crossed. Some distances exist not to punish, but to protect. Because what she built in his absence is too valuable to risk again. She learned to sit with her silence, and in doing so, she met a version of herself she had forgotten. A version who does not chase closure, who does not shrink for love, who does not settle for echoes. And now, the emotional landscape between them is no longer familiar terrain. It is a vast, quiet field of self-respect, and he does not know the way through it. Not without changing, not without rising. The most honest goodbyes are not said aloud. They are lived, they are felt, they are honored through the choices we make after the breaking. And for him, the day will come, if it hasn't already, when he feels what she always wanted to feel from him. There is nothing louder than a heart that no longer begs to be heard. And perhaps that's the final chapter he never saw coming. The chapter where you didn't need to say a word. The chapter where your joy spoke for you. The chapter where your silence became sacred, not sad. Louise Hay once wrote, "I am in the process of healing my heart." And healing, true healing, is not about never hurting again. It's about no longer confusing pain with love. It's about walking through the fire and realizing you are still whole, maybe even more whole than before. Lise Bourbeau reminds us, when a woman lets go of needing to be chosen, she rewrites every relationship she will ever have. She no longer asks to be seen, because now she sees herself. She no longer fights to stay, because now she knows her peace is worth more than presence. Yes, he will feel it. He may not understand it. He may not name it, but he will feel it. In the quiet, in the absence, in the joy that no longer includes him. But the beauty is, you don't need him to feel it anymore. You're not waiting for recognition. You're not hoping for a return. You are simply at peace. And when a man realizes that, truly realizes that, it's no longer about what he lost. It's about who you became in the process. So let that be the story, not of what ended, but of what awakened. If this journey resonated with you, I invite you to subscribe and continue walking this path with us, where peace, not pain, becomes your compass. And if your heart is ready for the next step, the video on your screen will guide you deeper. Because healing is not the end of love. It's the beginning of the right kind of love, the kind that starts with you.